Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. Now, I see that some of you have your notepads handy, some of you have your pens handy. You need those. I need you to take notes. I want you to make a commitment to yourself that you will jot down some sort of action item that you can implement in your business today. That's what this is all about. That's why we have these discussions. I'm meant to inspire you to do something today to make your business better. Perpetual refinement, continuous improvement. That's what this is all about. Today, I want to talk to you about the concept of cause and effect. Now, I've done a separate video on the difference between correlation and causation. Today, I want to focus a little bit more deeper on this idea of the lag that can occur between cause and effect and how pernicious it can be because there is a relationship, a strong relationship between that lag time between cause and effect and our blindness, our inability to see the cause, and how that impacts so many areas of our lives. So I'm going to give you some examples, but bottom line, what I'm saying here is the longer the time between a stimulus, something that happens, and the effect that it has, the less transparent it is, the less obvious that effect is to you, and therefore you can be oblivious to it. You can be ignorant to it throughout your entire life, and that's not what we want. We want to be as knowledgeable as possible. We want to understand the relationships, the causal relationships in particular. We want to understand the impact of our behavior, of our decisions, and we have this lag time between what we decide to do and what ends up happening. We seem to be completely ignorant to it, oblivious to it. We're blind to it. I want you to think about that. And that's why I'm going to spend most of today's discussion giving you examples. First, I'll give you some, just everyday life examples, and then we'll look at it more from the lens of business. I often like to use analogies as it relates to health and wellness because that's a particular interest and passion of mine, and I've had a lot of experience in this, both professionally and personally. So let's start there. What about nutrition? So nutrition is, I think, the biggest area in individual lives that you can appreciate this, because I want to give you the concept of the difference between a food allergy and a food sensitivity. So the difference, I would define it simply as the lag time between the effect and maybe the severity of the effect. So we've heard of people that have peanut allergies, or they may have a allergy to eggs or dairy or some sort of food allergy, and that they may go into some sort of anaphylactic shock. They may have breathing problems immediately. They may break out in hives. The severity of the symptom would certainly impact the definition, but also the lag time. So it's an allergy. If I have something right now, maybe I have gluten, and then immediately I have some sort of reaction, digestive system reaction or whatever. So that's what we think of when we say a food allergy. Now, food sensitivity, they can be, once again, much more pernicious because they may go undetected for years, because it may be 24, 48 hours or even more between the time you ingest something and when the symptoms occur, and the symptoms are far less severe, so you go blind to it. So what happens is maybe you eat something, again, you have a food sensitivity to wheat, but you never noticed it your whole life because you eat bread and pasta and these things, and you don't have, like the person with the allergy to gluten, that you have immediate pains in your digestive system or what have you. Instead, you might get some systemic inflammation. You might get a little bit stuffy, but it may not actually occur right away. Those symptoms are more subtle, and it happens 24 and 48 hours, maybe 36 hours later. It depends on the individual and how sensitive they are. I had some food sensitivities. I went and I had a test done. This test was somewhat controversial from what I understand, but the research I did into it made it sound that it was worth the investment to me. So I invested the money, had some food sensitivity testing done, and they gave me a report. And some of my favorite foods were on that report that I was apparently very sensitive to. And so you could argue, there was maybe a bit of a placebo effect or whatever. I get all that, but what I noticed was when I cut out those foods, immediately I felt better. I felt a difference. But I'm saying it that way, but I'm oversimplifying it. I cut out those foods. I had never noticed a difference or I'd never noticed any sort of adverse reaction to these foods before. I cut them out, and then what I did is I reintroduced them. That's where I noticed the difference immediately, is that my body responded in such a way. But it wasn't at that moment that I was actually ingesting them. It's overnight, so maybe I was a little more stuffy in my nasal passages or something like that. So these things I came to understand through my own research were symptoms of systemic inflammation. So if you were sniffing the next day because your nose was a little bit runny, or you weren't breathing through your nose as well as you ordinarily would, these were the things I noticed. And so as I started cutting out some of those things and really focusing on that, all of a sudden all sorts of symptoms were sort of disappearing. I didn't even notice these things were symptoms. I wouldn't have described them as symptoms. I would have just described them as life. I figured that's how everybody was. So they may impact your sleep and all that kind of stuff. It may impact your weight or your water retention. All these things are common as it relates to nutrition. So that's the first one I think of. Of course, related to nutrition as well is the concept of weight management. Now, I would say especially weight gain can be, once again, sort of insidious, where we don't make the immediate connection because you eat something that perhaps is not good for you. Maybe you're eating something, laced with sugar that's or very high carbs or whatever, and you may gain a little bit of weight. You may actually trigger an insulin response and convert some of that to fat. We won't go through all the science behind that. There's plenty of information out there for you to, if you're interested in that. But what I'm saying is you don't notice the weight gain that day. In fact, if you were to gain a pound in a month, you probably would never notice that. You'd look in the mirror every day, you would never notice. But in the course of 12 months, you've gained 12 pounds and you don't really even realize it until you take a look at a picture from a year ago or whatever. Especially what happens is people maybe notice it in the way their clothes are fitting, something like that, but it's so slow that they're not making that immediate connection with what they're doing. And so you don't take the time, you don't stop the presses, so to speak, and say, well, what's going on here? Why am I gaining weight? And this happens for many adults. They eat whatever they want throughout their teenage years, and then as they get into their adult years, slowly they start to gain some weight, and they don't notice. And then by the time they realize it's an issue, they haven't really made that connection. They're blind to what it was that caused it. Now they have, we're not stupid. We understand from our exposure to other people and popular media and everything. We think, okay, well, I need to go on a diet, I need to exercise more, and we buy into the common paradigms. And this video isn't, I would tell you that the paradigms of weight loss are largely flawed and have been for years. But again, that's not the topic of this. What I am saying though is that people then tend to react after a long time, and now trying to lose weight, this is a little less of a lag time, so it's a little more evident what is effective and what's not effective, what you're trying to do. But still, weight loss doesn't happen overnight or whatever, or the type of weight loss that does is usually not lasting, and it's not very healthy. So perhaps you lose a lot of water weight, and I'm not dismissing that as being meaningful, because that may mean that your systemic inflammation, your body has been retaining a bunch of water because of inflammation and lets go of it. If that's the reason why you've lost some water weight, then that's probably very healthy. But if you're just dehydrated, not so healthy, but that would make a big difference on the scale, and you might be tempted to say, oh, whatever I'm doing is working, and all you're doing is dehydrating yourself, or worse, well, not worse, but equally bad perhaps, or almost as bad, I suppose, is you'd be losing muscle if you were starving yourself, or you were eating really poorly in a way that caused you to, just lose muscle tissue. That would be a bad thing as well. And yet it would show up right away, so you might be encouraged to continue that. But let's say, for the sake of argument, you did something that you made some good nutritional decisions and you started to lose weight. That happens enough, and you get enough positive reinforcement in a short period of time that it's likely to be on your radar and you're paying attention. It's these things that are more pernicious, these things that can be insidious, that happen over time, that we're blind to because of the lag time. Remember, that's today's discussion. The lag time between the cause and effect makes you blind to these things. So there's the nutritional. But what about other fitness examples? What about the ideal exercise protocols? A lot of people struggle with exercise and maintaining a healthy exercise routine over time because they don't see results. And results as it relates to exercise, especially, muscle gain, strength gains, those things happen so slowly that lag time between the stimulus, your routine, your exercise, your strength training routine, and the results you get of getting stronger, although you get stronger, you tend to notice that on a shorter period of time than actually noticeable muscle gains that you might be able to identify in a mirror or something. And so if you're doing something right or wrong, it's more difficult to understand and know because of that lag time. It blinds you, it removes the transparency. Things become much more opaque when it comes to a long time between cause and effect. And that's where research becomes that much more important, and measurement becomes that much more important, quantifying these things. So there's a couple of examples for fitness. What about in other health-related, like chronic lifestyle-related diseases? I've mentioned systemic inflammation, and what about insulin resistance? Over time, people are doing things that may lead to heart disease or cancer or diabetes or Alzheimer's, all these types of what we would think of as chronic lifestyle diseases, and we think of them affecting people in their elderly years much more frequently. And yet they are, again, they're sort of insidious, where a person doesn't realize, well, what was I doing? What do I need to do? So we look to quick fixes, and we're looking for our doctor to try to treat the symptoms when we're not really treating the cause, because we don't understand the cause. We see that that's something, we're now affected by a disease, but we don't realize that it was something that we did. We miss completely the idea between the cause and effect because we're blind to it because of that lag time. These things developed over many years, decades, and we didn't notice them. So there's some examples from health, fitness, nutrition. But as I say, this is, ubiquitous. It's in all parts of your life. What about your relationships? We think of things like having poor boundaries. I've done a whole video on boundaries, and you should visit that video. If you don't know what I'm referring to with boundaries, the chances are that you're either consciously competent or unconscious. You're probably unconsciously competent. You have good boundaries and you practice good boundaries, but it's far more likely that you were raised in a household like me, that we didn't have a lot of boundaries or focused on boundaries, and you don't realize how that's impacting relationships until you look back over many years and you have a new education. If you understand it and somebody presents that to you, and then you can look back and you can go, oh yeah, I was blind to that all these years because the lag, the time between cause and effect. That is to say, so you may treat somebody, a loved one, with a poor boundary in your communication style or whatever, and nobody corrects you right away. And so you get away with it, and you don't realize that it deteriorated the relationship a little bit. And over time, you can really deteriorate relationships, and you can destroy relationships, or it can manifest in all sorts of other symptoms, dysfunctions in family life and relationships and all this stuff. Once again, a great example of, because of the lag time and the not severe symptom that occurs immediately afterward, we become blind to these things. So, and again, who's measuring that, right? You're not measuring the love, so to speak, or the the strength of the bond that you have, the emotional deposits and withdrawals that you have in relationships. If you're not doing that, you're not likely to have noticed anything, and then you can be unfortunately, you are the recipient of you are the heir of those decisions. You've made your bed, you lie in it, you have to deal with these things. And it can be, a two-way street. I don't want to get too much into that. Visit that video on boundaries though. Another example would be in terms of parenting. So we make decisions as parents that may impact our children, and it can once again to do with parenting, but perhaps we don't have any experience, or we didn't understand. You would go back to nutrition or things like that, other parenting decisions that can have lasting effects and really impact the children as they become adults and everything, and we didn't know. It's because of the lag, and then looking back we go, you know what, I might have done something different. Or nowadays they know that you shouldn't do this or that. Back in the day parents used to spank a lot, and these days there's a lot of research on that is very detrimental psychologically speaking. Newer parents would be like, yeah, of course, duh. But going even further back, drinking and smoking during pregnancy weren't really that taboo, and then science discovered things. But again, because of the distance, the length of time, the lag time between the cause and effect, we tend to be blind to these kinds of things. They can happen over a lifetime. Let's start to pull this discussion in a little bit, make it more relevant for your business and your effectiveness as a manager. So I think of politics and central authorities. So you have these campaign promises, and people get elected by promising all these freebies and these great benefits that we're going to get. And often the constituents who will vote in someone like that are blind to the fact that these cause a lot of societal problems. They cause all sorts of economic problems, and there's all sorts of detrimental effects that occur when a politician who promises all those things, whether we tend to see when they don't deliver on their promises because the lag time is shorter, but when they do deliver on those promises, we are probably blind to the adverse reaction it has throughout society. Maybe we're the benefactor of an immediate benefit, like a stimulus check, for example, or some sort of social program that we get to benefit from, but we don't see how that might impact the overall economy, and little by little have wealth transfer and bring down the overall standard of living because of stealing from one person and giving to another, so to speak, through social programs. So politically, it's not always obvious. Sometimes politicians get voted in time and again based on promises because people are blind to the nefarious effects of some of the things that they're doing, the policies they're enacting. And this can go on for years and years and years and generations where people just don't understand. They're not ever making the connection because of the distance between the things, and it's not obvious to us. So you have to do really philosophical studies and economic studies to understand these concepts, and then you can start to make the connections. Then you can see, and there are people who are measuring these things, and they are speaking about it and teaching others who will listen. The next one is just economics in general. There's talk of socialism and democratic socialism, and it's not always obvious again. So some of the countries that have done socialism in the early stages of their socialistic policies, things may have improved for a little while, and then the effects that occur, these incredibly detrimental effects to the populace at large, end up occurring, and people don't think it was the economic policies, when in fact it is. But it's that lag time. It may take months or years, often years. What about central banking impact of monetary policy with expanding the money supply, inflation, all these kind of things? They occur over such a long period of time that we're blind to it. We do not see the cause, and then we remain ignorant, and it takes a concerted effort for an individual to go back and understand, oh yeah, we shouldn't have done that. That sounded good at the time. I thought that was stimulating the economy or whatever, but it had the unintended consequence. And again, sometimes the politicians and the people at the central banks, they might be well-meaning. Often, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They're perhaps often very well-meaning, but they have unintended consequences. And then that takes us as a good segue to your business and management. And you are the central authority. You, your management team, are a central authority. And I've done a video on this. What policies are you enacting that have unintended consequences? I've always said, make it a best practice, or rather, it is a best practice to state things as best practices. Here's our culture, here's our values, and we try to have these best practices which support those values and uphold our culture, but we don't have these hard and fast rules and policies because they tend to have unintended consequences. And then you have to add a new policy to try to mitigate against the unintended consequences. Before you know it, you have this huge employee handbook, just like the government with their law books. They just get thicker and thicker, longer and longer, because it doesn't work. You need to decentralize. And today's discussion, once again, is about you are probably doing this because you don't realize the cause and effect. You have some symptoms in your business right now. Perhaps you have taken everything out of alignment between your stakeholders through some policies. You didn't realize that you were having that effect because it took time. It may have taken months or years, and the communication, people might be afraid to communicate, so you're not getting that immediate feedback, that severe symptom of pushback from your people, and you don't realize that you're causing bad things to happen in your business. What about marketing? We've talked a lot about marketing and the difference between tactical and branding. Well, tactical advertising tends to be much more expensive, and it's designed by nature to create an immediate response in the market. And so you invest money, and either it really worked and your sales went up and you're like, well, that was a really good marketing campaign, or it didn't, and you measure that. But branding, by comparison, takes a lot more time. So you may have had some branding efforts that are paying off great dividends, but because of the lag, you're doing some things that are much more subtle. They communicate the value and the values and the value of your product and service and the values of your business to the marketplace, but it takes a long time for that to pay off. It may be months and years down the road that these branding efforts, they create a whole bunch of awareness. And so you tend to think, it's not that great a return on my investment because you're not measuring it. You're not feeling the immediate effect. So be careful of that in business. You want to be very careful that you're not blind, once again, to something that is effective and it's good for your business, but because the cause and effect are so far apart, you're blind to it. So how about human resources? This is a big one. So maybe you have great or you have terrible recruitment practices, and you don't see immediately you don't see immediately the effect that it has in your business. So you hire someone because let's say you have some really poor recruitment practices, processes, and you don't realize for several months or a year or 2 years that you hired somebody who's not a great employee. You might think that I'm stretching it, but I'm telling you, based on observations of a lot of businesses and personal mistakes that I've made over the years, that happens. We tend to have confirmation bias. We hired somebody, and there was a reason we hired them, but we may have poor recruitment practices and the person was very likable in the interviews, or they had great experience or whatever, and so we confirm our bias throughout the first several months and even a year or whatever, and then we start to see some of the parts of their personality that came out that we didn't realize or whatever, and we may be in denial about that. Again, the lag time makes it where we didn't realize this comes down to recruitment. We start to think the person has changed, or it's on them, it's not our fault, because we fail to see the cause and effect. We don't take it all the way back, several months back, to our recruitment practices. The same could be said about our onboarding or training efforts. Again, if a person is just not working out and we're failing to meet our obligations, we may not see that because it doesn't necessarily manifest immediately. So that lag time makes us blind again. It's like the person, we keep giving them a second chance. They're not getting the second and third chance, or however many chances, and they're just not meeting our expectations. And maybe you had really good recruitment. Maybe it was an excellent hire, but you failed to commit to the best onboarding and training practices and investing in that person, and you failed to develop them, which is the next one. What about performance evaluations? Do you have report cards for your people? And are you able to see things on trajectories over time? If you're not measuring this stuff, and you should have picked up on this by now, somebody who was measuring and quantifying everything about their health throughout their life is much less likely to have some sort of chronic lifestyle disease sneak up on them, or weight gain sneak up on them, or something like that. So, but people tend to not do that. In business, you should be doing this. Are you quantifying things? Are you having report cards for your people? So human resources, I think, is the biggest area where we are blind to the problems we cause through poor management, through poor human resource practices. Lack of accountability is another one, which relates to boundaries and also relates to performance evaluations. I could go on and on about human resources and the mistakes that people make because they don't have the time, and they've never dedicated the time to it. They've never prioritized it because they are blind to what it's costing them, because the cause and effect is so far apart. What else? So we've covered management and human resources and marketing. What other areas of your business are being impacted? I want you to think about that. I want you to brainstorm and ask yourself, have you noticed anything over time? I mean, if you're blind to it, it's a really difficult exercise to do, but the reason I'm giving you examples is to try to convince you that you are probably suffering the ill effects of this somewhere in your business, and it's because there is a long time between the cause and effect, and you need to take it back and ask yourself, what am I doing wrong? Another area of the business would be logistics, your processes. So we've done a whole series on waste, on muda, and these are very nefarious. These are very insidious, I should say. These are very detrimental things to our business, but because they're so subtle and it doesn't appear immediately, we don't realize the impact over years all this waste is having on our bottom line. It puts many businesses out of business because they don't notice it. The little or minuscule waste that you are incurring is maybe not an issue today or tomorrow or this week, but over time, the cumulative effect of all that waste can really cause problems in your business. Another one, we've done a video on 5S. So if you have an operation that's not particularly clean, it's not, tidy, and you don't have a place for everything and everything in its place, so your operation's a little bit disorganized, a little bit dirty or whatever, you probably don't realize. If you're allowing that to occur, I guarantee you don't realize how much it's costing you. And those who have implemented a great 5S strategy, watch the video on that if you don't know what I'm talking about, and have realized the benefits, they see that cause and effect because it starts to happen and they're quantifying it. So the opposite is where you are experiencing these deleterious effects, is that you are allowing things to be a little bit cluttered, a little bit dirty or whatever, and it starts to impact the quality of your products or services and the attitudes of your people and the brand and these types of things, and you don't make the connection. It's not immediate that you go back to your management team or you say to yourself, I need to implement some 5S. We need to clean up around here, because you don't realize. It's like, well, I can't figure out what's causing this. And I contrast this to financial investments. So if you're investing in equipment, or you're investing in the stock market or real estate, facility, whatever it may be that you invest, financially, it's so important to us, the risk. We want to make sure that we understand the impact of that. So we tend to measure things. We look at reports. How is my investment paying off over time? Is it good? Especially in the example of your personal investments. So, protecting your nest egg or your retirement. If you're investing in various assets, you want to see how those appreciate, what kind of dividends are they paying. The returns that you are getting is very much measured. So you should pick up from that contrast of how we do with financial capital investments with everything else we've been talking about, relationship investments, human resource investments, branding investments. Oh, a big one that I left out on your business is customer satisfaction, investment in customer satisfaction. It's not always obvious. I've witnessed several management members make poor decisions to retain a customer, to make a customer happy, because they were focused on the short term. Again, they were very obvious, or they could see the cost would be involved in making the customer happy. Perhaps they needed to issue a refund or spend some money to make the customer happy in one way or another, and they could see that. Or maybe their pride, they could feel immediately their pride was attacked and they wanted to be right, and so it was a peeing contest. They're just arguing with the customer. Those types of things, because those are more immediate, the cause and effect is more obvious. But the opposite is when we invest in that customer satisfaction and the customer goes away, and we might not see that customer again, might not see them for many years, and we may never see, we're completely blind to the fact that they may have told 10 people, you know, I was happy dealing with Acme widgets because I had an issue with them and they looked after it, or whatever the case may be. And so customer satisfaction investments tend to pay off through word of mouth, through referrals, through repeat business. But all of those things take place over a long period of time for most businesses. Depending on the product or service, repeat business may not be, you know, daily or weekly or monthly. It may be several years may pass. And so we don't get that immediate gratification and response where we tell ourselves, okay, what I did in retaining the customer was really important. So once again, by measuring these things and just accepting the way we do with nutrition or the way we do with fitness, that I need to exercise, I know it's going to be beneficial to my health, I need to be committed to customer satisfaction, I need to check my pride at the door, I need to always put on my game face and be enthusiastic with customers. So there's another example. But the key here, what I was making that point about investment, is that in other areas that people tend to quantify things, operationalize things, measure things, they get that feedback that might otherwise be opaque, that might otherwise be blind because the cause and effect is lagging. So ask yourself, your homework today, ask yourself what things in your business take a really long time to materialize, such as the development of an excellent team member or a successor to you in management or something like that. And what might I be blind to because I'm not measuring it? And then get back to doing that. I hope you got something out of this. I think that's where I want to leave this today. This concept about the level of blindness that we have due to the lag time, or in proportion to the lag time between cause and effect. I really want you to reflect on that. It's helped me a lot in management to become more effective, and that's what we're trying to do here, become more effective. Push back if you disagree with me, or if you're like, yeah, no, that's true, and you have some examples. Please share those in the comments, and if you want me to clarify something, or if you want me to cover a topic in greater detail, we have a link in the description. You can do that somewhat anonymously. That is to say, if I cover a topic for you that is related to your business or a challenge you're having, I won't give anything away about your business or your name or identify you. There's a link in the description to follow that. If you struggle with some of these concepts that I discussed with measurement or whatever, we offer report cards. We can help you with human resources, with your recruitment. We can help you with your performance evaluations and your analytics for your overall, for your marketing, all these types of things. I recognize these these problems in business from my own experience, and we've implemented products and services for our customers so that if they're struggling with this and they just don't know how to fix it, you can reach out to us. We'll have links in the description for a couple of those products that are maybe more meaningful to today's discussion. Go to our website if you want to explore more on that, and by all means leave a comment, because when you leave a comment, somebody else reads it, and don't worry about looking silly. When other people read it and they agree with you or they disagree, that really expands our minds, and we learn from one another, and we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.